Good morning. Yesterday I made reference to Einstein, where he said the reason why I asked the same questions in the final exam of the physics students was because the answers have changed. And it certainly gives me a strong drive that the things that got us here are not going to be the things that get us there. Something has to change, because the answers just keep moving. Every year we just hear examples of things that we did yesterday that probably were the wrong things, that had been done a different way, we would have been so better. That's not going to be no different in the future. But the curious thing is that most of us, when we're confronted with the reality that the answers have changed, we either do one of two things. We either do more of the same in an attempt to break the wall down, like the jackhammer approach, or we start doing less of the same. But a very small percentage of us actually start doing things differently. And if the statistics are right, and I know statistics are statistics, 3% of us would stand back and start to do things differently. I choose to believe that that 3% is here today, so don't feel offended. And it is curious, because you end up with the reality that there is a thing called mental myopia. There is a thing where, as an example, how many of you have driven home and after a half an hour you realize, wow, how did I get here? It's because we like doing things on autopilot. And that's what we do at work. We do things at autopilot. We keep doing the same thing. Instead of stopping and taking a breath and reassessing where I am before we continue. And if you look at the rest of the world, if you walk out there, you see a Harvey Norman on every street corner, because that's the way you sell furniture. But that was not the case for the guy that started IKEA. He was fed up of the corner store. He was fed up of selling assembled furniture to people, and he said, I'm going to sell it as flat packs and let them assemble it. And look where that ended up. Or you may be the guy that doesn't want a computer shop anymore. That guy ends up as being Dell Computers today. So if we really want to push the boundary of where we're going, then we've got to start to think outside of the box. And I heard many of you refer to this box. But if I look back at the box, our box sometimes are too small. The boundaries of our box is too tight. On the one side, we've got legal constraints. The other side, we've got technological constraints. We've got moral and ethical constraints. And we've got physical constraints. But instead of the box being the big box, our box is this little small box. Because it's easy to operate in that small box. It's easy to be seen to make a difference in my small little box. And here starts our journey with Gorgon, Chevron's journey with Gorgon. The box was pretty small back in the 80s when we discovered the gas field. It was a vast gas field, 40 trillion cubic feet of gas. But for the box of the time, technology and finances as a physical constraint and the law on second constraint, the gas reservoir was in 1,200 meters of water. And below that, in 2,400 meters of substrate. So there's almost 4 kilometers before you get it to the surface. And then you've got to traverse it over a subsea escarp that's bigger than the Snowy Mountain escarp. You've got to bring it up, and you've got to process it. And on top of that, the gas has got 14% CO2. And in this modern world, who wants to vent 14% CO2? So it was put on hold because the box was too small. But there was a small group of people that refused to accept the boundary conditions imposed on us at the time. And by the late 90s, there was a growing awareness that we can do this. It can be done. And we manned up a project team, and we've got 5 very distinct phases that we go through. And we went through phase 1 to recognize that the opportunity is there. And then we went into phase 2 figure out which of the alternatives are the most appropriate, and one of the alternatives was build it on Barrow Island, and that made everybody sit up straight because it was a protected area. And the reason why it was to be built on Barrow Island is immediately below Barrow Island there was a geological formation called the Depoy Formation at 2,500 meters that was just perfect to sequestrate the carbon dioxide. So you had a choice. You're either going to build it on mainland, you can't sequestrate the CO2, you're going to build it on a nature reserve where you can sequestrate the CO2. If you don't sequestrate the CO2, it adds to the problems that we have in the atmosphere. If you do sequestrate the CO2, you're on a protected area. So you may be tempted to give up. In fact, a lot of people wished we would give up, and we didn't give up. So we went through this planning process that was quite impossible. And we got rejected by the EPA 3 times. The 4th time we won by appeal. Not won, we came to an agreement by appeal that we can do it. And we think EPA was right when they said no, because it is a protected area. It's the reason for their existence. So philosophically, they could not say yes. But in the end, we could satisfy people that we actually can do this job. For those, I'm dumbstruck when I'm on the East Coast and I say to people, Barrow Island, and they say, what, where? I say, well, it's the largest industrial project in Australia. They said, never heard of it. So I'm going to start off with a geographic lesson. It's on the northwest coast of Australia. It's 2,000 kilometers to Perth. It's 2,000 kilometers to Singapore. Why Singapore? As we could have mobilized out of Singapore if we wanted. It's 70 kilometers from the coast. Closest town is Karratha, which is sort of a mining hub and an oil and gas hub in that vicinity. We've been on that island since 1963. It's been a protected area since 1910, predominantly proclaimed for the turtles there. It's got 5 species that don't occur, mammal species that don't occur anywhere in Australia. That used to be in Australia, but became extinct because of foxes and cats and rats. And it had no endemic plants, and at that time, no known endemic invertebrates. Today, we know there are 24 endemic invertebrates on the island, most of them stygofauna and troglofauna. So it is a special place. It's a place like no other on the West Australian coast, and we were not surprised when the public rallied strongly around this notion that why are we there? We started off when we designed the first phase, and the economics did not work out. We were planning to build 2 trains, and the 2 trains did not work out economically. So we manned down, went down to 37 people again, and we huddled again, and instead of giving up on the project, we got back together again, and we realized we can make it work if we spend more money, if we build 3 trains. So the development cost went up from, in the 90s, it was 5 billion. In the early 2000s, it went up to 12 billion. It went up to 18 billion, went up to 25 billion. 37 billion, we ended up 53 billion. But it worked out with the technology that was available to us by the time we built this thing. How big was it? 53,000 people worked on it, 8,000 people on the island. It's an island where no people live permanently. So some people ask me the question, what about the people that live there? Do they participate in agriculture? There's no development on the island, other than the original oil operation. And we've got about 50% stake in it. Exxon and Shell are in it, so the 3 biggest oil companies in the world have got an interest in this. And this is why we could bring a team together that was actually quite remarkable. And today we sit there with a plant that over the life of the plant, we will contribute over 400 billion to the Australian economy. In all likelihood, it'll pay the pension and the super of many of us that sit here. Was that worth it? Was the risk to the biodiversity worth it? Absolutely. And the journey that we went through is a remarkable journey. We were asked to build a comprehensive biosecurity system. We were asked to design a step change in biosecurity because of the vast change in the supply chain to the island. There's a couple of numbers that always dumbfounds me when I look at them. But the important part is that 100% of cargo got inspected, not at one point, but at several points in the supply chain. And this is what's so different to what we see in biosecurity systems around the world at the moment. We certainly focused on, this graph we inherited. When we had a look at this, it was a no-brainer for us. If we look at where the cost and the effort, the greatest value for us was, it was a pre-border value. People say it's easy for you because you can make pre-border decisions. For nations, it's not so easy. I don't agree with that. And I'll tell you why I don't agree with that as we go along. But we had a total pre-border feature. A lot of the work that I've heard presented here this week were post-border work. Almost nobody have demonstrated a good investment pre-border. And I think we should expand our horizons. We should increase our box and start to think, how can we invest pre-border? Because if we're going to fight biosecurity into the future post-border, we're bound to lose a couple of fights. And when you lose a couple of fights, you're bound to lose the battle. So we decided we're going to have a pre-border focus. We developed a management system. It's not ISO accredited for a number of reasons, but the important part I want to refer to here is what made it work. It wasn't money that made it work. It wasn't the case that we threw money at it. It wasn't the case that we could use our hundreds of engineers to design the problem out. It was the fact that we could communicate with people. And we communicated with people in a manner becoming the audience that we spoke to. I said on the first day we surround ourselves with our technical language because it's what we do. We sound so smart when we do that. But you find that sweet spot as a starting point for the conversation. Then we don't go down the rabbit hole too far, because then people suffer from mental myopia. They sit there and you can see you've lost them. As I can see here, I've lost some of you, but I know who you are, so I'll talk to you later. And then we're not fixated on the detail, on the complexity. We're rather fixated on the concept, bring the concept across to people, than the detail. And then we really think we're cool, the things we do. So those are the four things that we plug into that communication bucket. And that works for us. It brings our story across. If I say to people, I work in biosecurity, their first thoughts are, I've got something to do with the army, something with biological warfare. We must seriously think about whether we've captured the people's imagination, if that's the response. Have you guys had that response? That they think you work for the army, or? Yeah. Then we've got something wrong with the way we carry our message forward. And then we did a couple of things that I think was nice. We have an early engagement stage. No matter where you find yourself in the organization, whether you're in finance, you're counting the beans, or whether you're the auditor that comes behind us and cleans up whatever we do, we first have an engagement session so that everybody has got a shared view of the world. We don't believe in having these peaks within our organization where some people understand better than other people. And then we went to our designs. We looked at every design. And we asked the questions as to how could I remove biosecurity risk out of this design. And if you see the things that we've developed, fabulous structures, and to think that every place where angle iron comes together, there's a weeping hole to prevent water from pooling on a structure that is somewhere in the vicinity of 14 million tons of equipment and things went onto the island. Then you realize, but how did you glean over those 73,000 drawings that we had to identify all those little nooks and corners where quarantine risk would reside? It's because we engaged early. And our design engineers came to us and said, I found another place where risk could be. And there stands this thing that is designed purposefully to produce gas, but not to carry biosecurity risk with it. And only then do we get to the inspection protocols that we had. And then after the inspections, we preserve that status. We don't take that inspected item and we let it go, because every time you move it an inch, it picks up risk again. And we preserve that status either via we put it into a container, or we shrink wrap it. We started the whole industry in the West around shrink wrapping equipment that are out of gauge. Or we apply a residual insecticide, and in the final analysis, we developed a fumigant, which we'll talk about a bit later. So that custody and control was very important to us. And then we went to site, and every item had a location on the site. That if we had to backtrace things, because we have an event of some kind, we could go back to the exact place where items went that we assessed to have possibly carried that risk. And then we survey and we monitor. Surveillance is presence or absence at any point in time, and monitor is to determine trends that may indicate the presence of non-indigenous species on the island, which includes viruses and pathogens and things. And then a preparedness and our ability to control, where we have preconceived ideas of how to react when you have various kinds of organisms on the island. For instance, when myrtle rust came into Australia, we worked with the CRC on a plan of how do we react should myrtle rust make it to Barrow, although the environment is too arid there. But we had a plan if myrtle rust ever came to Barrow. We verified which species are at risk, and we've got a plan in place as to what we want to do with that. So that was our conceptual design of the management system. So what happened thereafter, I'm not going to focus on the detail here, is we tracked every pathway. Yesterday, a day before yesterday, I said the vault with the information that you need if you want to participate in this space is not readily available. We could not find readily access to information around the pathways of which risk could carry. And many of the things that we committed to was a very conservative case because we just had to believe what people told us. So we kept faithfully all the data associated with all the pathways and how they're related to people and luggage, how they're related to vessels, how they're related to the modules. And we could build up a picture as what happens pre-border, border, and post-border. And look at the post-border. This is after 7 years. There were only 110 events post-border, which were predominantly driven by things such as parachute seeds, which is very difficult to determine whether a parachute seed is attributable to the project or whether it's just blown in. Things like Soncus or Pampas or tall fleabane, Cornisa. So out of that 110, there were singletons that were in a high-risk category, notably Asian house gecko, which is not a risk to Australia, which I can't understand because it's known to displace native gecko. If you look at Darwin, Asian house gecko has been in Darwin now for 50 years. It's starting to encroach on the native environment. We had one incident where we had an introduction at Wappet Landing, limited to Wappet Landing, and we caught 6 Asian house gecko. There's a competition in the West called the Golden Gecko Award, and we didn't enroll one of our initiatives into the Golden Gecko Award competition that year because we caught 6 of our own. It was $3.5 million to catch the 6. So we know how much it will cost if we make a mistake. If that's what 6 gecko costs you, imagine what a big population would be like. An interesting thing was most of the contamination happened in transit. After you get to that state that you want to be in, most that happens on that vessel. If you go back to the previous slide, if you look at the contribution of vessels, the topsides and the domestic shipments, that's almost 50% of all events on vessels in the supply chain occurred on vessels. And when you look at the number of non-events, they relate to, because the vessel only makes landfall, it doesn't introduce something to Barrow. About half between seeds and vertebrates, and a couple of odds and sods elsewhere. You'll see the low number on soil and organic matter. We developed trailers and containers and wash bays fit for purpose. So you develop a trailer, you develop a container, and it goes through a wash, automated wash, that cleans all the hot spots on it. For instance, our containers don't have the inverted J on the bottom, it's got V-bottoms, that big bar V-bottom that doesn't capture any dirt or any water. Again, example of how we designed it out. How successful was it? 2% of things discovered at the border during the inspection related to soil. So this brings me to the magic that happened between us and CRC. We met CRC in 2005, 2006 at one of the annual functions. Can you remember 2005, 2006? Huh? I think it's a long time ago. All of us were significantly younger then, enthusiastic about this, and CRC said, Plant Biosecurity said, although we are in the plant business, we're keen to explore a relationship. That's about the only common ground we had. We were planning to build a gas plant. They were interested in plant biosecurity. That's the closest we could get to each other, as two different kinds of plants. But we had one common goal. We were committed. We were committed to the idea of new benchmarks and best practice. The idea that she'll be all right just wasn't good enough for us. The idea that it was good enough was not good enough for us. We really were committed to establishing something that was special. And because of that philosophical similarity that the two organizations had, we had a relationship that spanned a decade where we never had a disagreement, which I think was quite remarkable. It's a tribute to the people that have worked in that campaign. We were committed to the conservation values, which is a difficult thing to commit to. Because, take any of us, if we get up in the morning, you ask me what my values are for that morning, some days a little bit different to the previous day, depends how difficult the day was, because our values keep moving. But notwithstanding that, we were committed to protecting conservation values. We were asked to develop a risk assessment on conservation values, which to our knowledge was the first time that we have a risk assessment that assessed conservation values. And just for your interest, there were 4 discrete categories of values that we had to address: infection modes, the ability to survive, the ability to detect, and the ability to eradicate. And there were 10 different categories within each one of those. It was like a 10-by-4 matrix. That's what we followed. Quite complex, but in the end it was quite helpful because we could get everybody to understand the same view. And there started our very long and productive relationship. We would not have been, I know, we would not have been in the place where we ended up had it not been for that relationship. We started off with a limited understanding. Today we have a big understanding, and the real breakthrough in understanding where this went was really with the insects. I referred to that on the first day, but it was quite remarkable. For us to proverbially have run out of names to name the new insects is quite remarkable. I often say to people in the sexy world of taxonomy, if you want to be immortalized, send us your name. We can add it there to one of the hundreds that we've got. But it gave us a challenge. If so little was known about these things, and if morphological taxonomy is in such a fragile place, more of the taxonomists are on the endangered list than insects we have because they are so old. It's a rapidly aging community then. And what do we do when we run out of taxonomic capability, which did happen in the case of a marine species, one of the sea squirts. The world expert on sea squirts died during the construction phase. And we did have a sea squirt issue in the marine environment, which made us to think about this quite differently. But I want to draw your attention to, on the right side, there were a number of non-Indigenous species present on the island, and this is the reason why we did the baseline with such enthusiasm. It's because we knew after we accessed the island, we were going to be blamed for anything that was on the island. So we better know what it is that we're inheriting. And we did a baseline, and we did find 30 insects on the island that should not be there. But they're cosmopolitan insects. In fairness to the oil operation, they're things like cockroaches, and 2 species of daddy longlegs, and the black wall spider. So they're all, and bed bugs. And they're cosmopolitan species restricted to the old oil establishment that is rapidly winding down now. So we sort of knew what we inherited. So to try and overcome this taxonomic thing, our first deliverable with the CRC, I'm only going to pick a couple of examples here of the many that we did, was we worked with Ken Walker, CRC, and we added some 25,000 images to paddle. There's a special category on paddle called Barrow Island, And the reason why we wanted to do that is we wanted to excite the workforce about the remarkable biodiversity on the island. The purpose of paddle here was a reference point for scientists, but it was an easy, accessible place where we could direct our staff and our contractor workforce towards to go see what lives on the island. And we had a number of exhibitions, and we print these fabulous photographs out, and we use them in our talks, and we build an enthusiasm amongst a workforce that typically we're not associated with biodiversity. And that worked. We still use paddle to this day, and we'll probably continue with our relationship through Pest Point, as you saw yesterday, to help build this. Why do we do that? We also believe the public should have access to this information because it's a protected area. It belongs to me and you. It should be like that for all our protected areas. And we would like to set an example as what we should be doing when we do proclaim areas as protected areas. We kitted out 2 laboratories with all kinds of equipment, the greatest and the flashiest of microscopes and things, and we're happy with what happened in paddle. But we knew it couldn't end there. Second thing we did is we were charged with demonstrating with a statistical power of 0.8 that we have not introduced non-Indigenous species. So we said to the community, now how do we do that? So guess what was the first response? A frequentist way to doing surveillance. In other words, number of points, and we add it up, and we tell you what the probability and the likelihood is what you're going to do. We rejected that. We said that's old school. We all know how ineffective certain traps are, and we all know that we haven't got an ability to aggregate different surveillance techniques. How do you aggregate a pitfall trap, a vacuum, a winkler sack, average person collecting a thing on a plane not related to science, and how do you allocate probability to that? And we found Kerry Mengelson in Queensland, and we worked out the Bayesian model for what we do. A very powerful model that has served us well. I'm not going to go into the detail of that. Many, many articles have been published around this model that we've got. Just a staggering number, on an island of 23,000 hectares, we do 140,000 surveillance hours a year, which is quite a number. But more staggering, outside of the science programs, 60%, 62% of what was reported was by the citizen, by the worker. And here lies the challenge to you. How can we mobilize public to do our work for us in a manner that they actually contribute meaningfully? At the moment, most of the large outbreaks within cities are reported by the public. How can we mobilize the farmer? How can we mobilize the tourist? If 60% of what we do were detected on people and luggage, we better do something differently in that space. We did portfolio theory with Tom Compass here in Melbourne, originally up in Canberra. Is where do we spend what money? We're tired of spending money on pet projects. Amongst us here in this audience, there are some of us here that know we are dealing with our pet project and not necessarily the priority. We've got to get that right. We've got to get the dollar to the right place. eDNA, we're bagging morphological diagnostics. We're busy developing a system where we do pattern recognition, where as long as it falls within the pattern, we're not worried. If it falls outside of the pattern, then we will go investigate. We think there lies a lot of benefits within that approach. It costs less money. It enhances our reputation. It gives us a better outcome. And now rapidly, are you sure your clock is right? Huh? We did a surveillance program on rodents. We've got automated traps and automated listening devices. We don't have biologists and taxonomists running around the bush anymore. They send it to my computer and to Melissa's computer, and we can see who's there and who's not there. If somebody is there that should not be there, we recognize them by their heat signature on their footprint, where we wrote algorithms for the things that we don't like. It traps it automatically. If we're not there within 2 hours, it will release it, because trapping mortality is so high within that warm environment. We design error-tolerant systems, fumigation. Nitrogen is 78% of the atmosphere. We strip it out. We vaporize ethyl formate, and we use it to fumigate every container. So there's almost a 100% solution there for us. And then we do training. We've got a remarkable training program, which is built on what pilots do, flight simulation. And we assure a high level of competence there. And then lastly, what made this big idea work? It's trust. We trusted each other. Substantial investment, both of us trusted each other. We've networked well, a spirit of innovation. It's not a spirit of keep doing more of the same or less of the same, but a spirit of innovation. And then 3 things that are important. Winning behaviors, speed, flexibility, and agility. Somebody said their program's been running for 15 years. It won't work for us. It's too slow. Then we've got winning behaviors. We keep it simple. We're decisive. We're results-driven. And we're relentless in pursuit of that solution. And then priming behaviors. Make sure I understand what you mean. You make sure you know what I mean, and then we come to an agreement. We just don't leave it waving in the wind. We use those 3 attributes, and then we create this place where it's okay to fail. And if you fail, put up your hand fast. We believe in failing fast, because then we can start over again. That was the nature of what we did with CRC. And we say thank you to all those that worked with us. Okay.